Hope and faith, a message that declares God is going to open the door. No matter where you find yourself today, whether you're facing a challenge, waiting for an answer, or seeking direction, know this: God is working on your behalf. And the door you've been praying for will open in His perfect timing. The concept of God having authority over doors is both comforting and empowering. Revelation 3:8 says, "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." This verse underscores the sovereignty of God in orchestrating opportunities and outcomes in our lives. When God opens a door, it signifies His divine approval, purpose, and timing. No earthly force, be it opposition, circumstance, or even our own fears, can prevent what God has ordained. Think about the story of Noah. God instructed Noah to build an ark and gave him specific instructions on how to prepare for the flood. When the time came, it was God Himself who shut the door of the ark, Genesis 7:16. This act symbolizes God's ultimate control over doors of safety, provision, and judgment. It shows us that when God closes a door, it is often for our protection or to redirect us to His greater plan. Similarly, when God opens a door, He provides access to something beyond our ability to achieve on our own. For example, in Acts 16, Paul and Silas were in prison, yet they continued to pray and sing praises to God. At midnight, God caused an earthquake that opened all the prison doors and loosened their chains. This wasn't just a random event, it was a divine act to demonstrate God's power and purpose. When God decides to open a door, He ensures that it aligns with His plan and glorifies Him in the process. In our lives, we may face situations where doors appear closed, opportunities seem out of reach, or circumstances feel like barriers. However, we must remember that God's authority supersedes any obstacle. A closed door doesn't mean denial, it might mean delay, preparation, or redirection. Trusting in God's authority means believing that He sees the bigger picture and has our best interests at heart, even when we don't understand His methods. This trust in God's authority should change how we approach decisions and challenges. Instead of forcing doors open in our own strength, we should seek God in prayer and ask for His guidance. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and not rely on our understanding. When we acknowledge Him in all our ways, He directs our paths and often opens the right doors. Moreover, understanding God's authority over doors invites us to embrace humility. We recognize that success isn't solely about our effort or ability, but about God's favor and timing. This shifts our focus from striving to surrendering, allowing God to lead us in opportunities that align with His will. It also helps us to let go of frustration or discouragement when doors remain closed, trusting that God knows what He's doing. In conclusion, God's authority over doors is a reminder of His power, love, and sovereignty. When He opens a door, we can walk through it with confidence, knowing it's part of His divine plan. When He closes a door, we can trust that it's for our good, even if we don't see it immediately. Our role is to stay faithful, seek His guidance, and trust that in His perfect timing, the right doors will open. Here's an expanded discussion on God's timing is perfect and faith is the key. Totaling approximately 600 words, God's timing is perfect. One of the greatest truths about God is that His timing is always perfect. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." This verse captures the essence of God's timing. It's not rushed or defolds according to His divine plan. As human beings, we often want things immediately. Our natural tendency is to strive for instant solutions and quick outcomes. But God operates on an eternal timeline which is far beyond our understanding. Consider the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. Yet for years this promise seemed unfulfilled. Sarah remained barren, and as time passed they grew older and less confident in the possibility of having a child. It wasn't until Abraham was 100 years old that Isaac, the son of promise, was born. While the waiting period must have been challenging for Abraham and Sarah, God's timing was intentional. Through their experience, God demonstrated that His promises are not bound by human limitations or logic. In our own lives, waiting on God's timing can be difficult. Whether it's waiting for a career breakthrough, a relationship healing, or another significant event, the process often tests our patience and faith. However, during these waiting seasons, God is at work behind the scenes. He is preparing us for what lies ahead, aligning circumstances, and ensuring that when the door does open, we are ready to step into His blessings. Waiting also refines our character. Romans 5:3-4 teaches us that perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. The waiting period is not wasted time. It's a season of growth, development, and preparation. Like gold refined in fire, we emerge from these periods stronger and better equipped to handle what God has in store. Furthermore, trusting God's timing requires surrender. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding. When we surrender our timelines and expectations to Him, we find peace even in the waiting. We learn to rest in the assurance that God knows what's best for us and that His timing is always for our good. Faith is the key. Faith is the bridge between where we are and the doors God wants to open for us. Hebrews 11:6 declares, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith is more than believing in God's existence. It's trusting Him completely, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith allows us to act, pray, and hope with confidence, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. The Bible is filled with examples of individuals whose faith unlocked miraculous doors. One powerful story is that of the widow in 2 Kings 4. She was on the brink of losing everything and turned to the prophet Elisha for help. Elisha instructed her to gather as many empty jars as she could and pour a small amount of oil into them. Though the instructions seemed illogical, she obeyed in faith. As she poured, the oil multiplied, filling every jar. This miracle was not just about provision, it was a demonstration of how faith in action opens the door for God's power to move. Faith also empowers us to see beyond our current circumstances. When Joshua and the Israelites faced the towering walls of Jericho, it must have seemed impossible to conquer the city. Yet, by faith, they obeyed God's command to march around the walls for 7 days. On the 7th day, the walls came crashing down, and the city was theirs. Their faith activated God's promise, proving that no obstacle is too great when we trust Him. In our lives, faith requires us to take bold steps. It may mean applying for a job even when we feel underqualified, starting a new venture despite uncertainty, or continuing to pray for a breakthrough that seems delayed. Faith doesn't guarantee an immediate result, but it positions us to receive what God has already planned. Ultimately, faith also sustains us when the wait is long or the answer isn't what we expected. It reminds us to trust God's character, His promises, and His power. Faith says, even if I don't see it now, I believe that God is working for my good. It's the key that unlocks the door to God's blessings, purpose, and miracles in our lives. By embracing the truth that God's timing is perfect and acting with unwavering faith, we align ourselves with His plan. These two principles, trusting His timing and activating our faith, go hand in hand, ensuring that when God opens the door, we are ready to walk through it. Here's an expanded discussion on 3 key points: God's authority over doors, God's timing is perfect, and faith is the key. Totaling approximately 600 words, God's authority over doors. One of the most reassuring aspects of God's character is His ultimate authority over every door in our lives. Revelation 3:8 reminds us, see, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. This verse emphasizes that God has both the power to open and close doors, and His decisions are final. When God opens a door, no human effort, opposition, or circumstance can prevent it from happening. This truth is a source of confidence, because it assures us that the opportunities God provides are secure regardless of external challenges. Consider the story of Noah in Genesis. After God instructed Noah to build the ark, it was God Himself who shut the door to protect Noah and his family from the flood. This act demonstrates that God doesn't just open doors of opportunity, but also closes doors for protection or redirection. When God closes a door in your life, it's not rejection. It's often His way of shielding you from harm or leading you towards something better. In our daily lives, we often try to force doors open in our own strength, only to face frustration or disappointment. However, acknowledging God's authority over doors teaches us to rely on Him and trust that His decisions are for our ultimate good. Instead of striving, we can surrender our desires to Him, knowing that when He opens a door, it will align perfectly with His plan for our lives. God's timing, His perfect timing, is a crucial part of God's plan, and His timing is never flawed. Ecclesiastes 3:11 states, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This verse reveals that God doesn't just do things randomly. His timing brings order, purpose, and beauty to our lives. Although we may feel impatient during waiting periods, it's essential to trust that God is orchestrating events for our good and His glory. Think of the story of Joseph. God gave him a vision of leadership as a young man, but that vision didn't come to fruition until many years later. In the interim, Joseph faced betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. From a human perspective, his waiting period seemed unjust and unnecessary. However, God was using each moment to prepare Joseph for his ultimate role as a leader in Egypt. By the time the door to leadership opened, Joseph had developed the character, wisdom, and humility needed to fulfill his purpose. Waiting on God's timing isn't easy, but it is necessary. It refines our character, deepens our faith, and aligns us with God's will. During these waiting seasons, God often removes distractions, teaches us to rely on Him, and prepares us for what lies ahead. When we trust His timing, we can rest in the assurance that He is always working for our good, even when we can't see it. Faith is the key. Faith is the bridge between us and the doors God wants to open. Hebrews 11:6 reminds us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith is more than just believing that God exists. It's trusting in His promises and acting as though they are already fulfilled. Faith allows us to pray with confidence, act with boldness, and hope in the face of uncertainty. Throughout the Bible, faith plays a pivotal role in unlocking God's blessings. In 2 Kings 4, a widow was instructed by the prophet Elisha to gather empty jars and pour her small amount of oil into them. Although the request seemed illogical, she acted in faith. As she poured, the oil multiplied, filling every jar she had collected. This miracle didn't happen because of her resources, but because of her faith. Faith also requires action. James 2:17 tells us that faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Taking bold steps of faith, whether it's pursuing a dream, serving others, or trusting God's promises, positions us for His miracles. However, faith isn't just about acting. It's also about trusting when the answer isn't immediate. When the Israelites faced the walls of Jericho, they didn't see an instant result. But by faith, they followed God's instructions to march around the city for 7 days. On the 7th day, the walls came crashing down. Their obedience and persistence demonstrated their trust in God, and their faith activated the victory He had already planned. Faith is the key that unlocks the doors God has prepared for us. It gives us the courage to move forward, even when the outcome isn't visible. It sustains us during waiting periods and strengthens us in the face of challenges. Faith says God has already made a way, and I trust Him to lead me through it. By recognizing God's authority over doors, trusting His perfect timing, and acting in faith, we position ourselves to experience His blessings and purpose fully. These principles remind us that when God opens the door, it's worth every moment of preparation and trust. Here's an expanded discussion on 4 key points. God's authority over doors, God's timing, His perfect faith is the key, and the waiting season is preparation. Totaling approximately 600 words, God's authority over doors is a reminder of His sovereignty and power in our lives. Revelation 3:8 says, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. This statement reflects that God's plans and purposes are unchangeable. When He opens a door, it signifies an opportunity or path designed specifically for us. No amount of human interference, opposition, or difficulty can override what God has ordained. Consider Noah in Genesis. After following God's instructions to build the ark, it was God who closed the door behind Noah and his family, sealing them inside and protecting them from the flood. This illustrates that when God shuts a door, it's not rejection but protection or redirection. Trusting His authority over doors teaches us to lean on His wisdom and not our understanding. In our lives, we often try to force open doors or question why some remain closed. But acknowledging God's authority means surrendering to His will and trusting that He knows what's best. The doors He opens lead to blessings and growth, while the ones He closes are for our good, even if we don't see it immediately. God's timing is perfect. God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. Ecclesiastes 3:11 reminds us, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This means that God orchestrates every event and season with precision, ensuring that things happen when they should not, a moment too soon or too late. The story of Abraham and Sarah demonstrates this truth. God promised them a child, but they had to wait until Sarah was past childbearing age before the promise was fulfilled. This delay wasn't accidental, it was intentional. God's perfect timing magnified the miracle, showing that His power transcends human limitations. Waiting on God's timing can be challenging, especially when we feel ready for the next step. However, it's in these seasons of waiting that God prepares us. He aligns circumstances, strengthens our faith, and ensures we're equipped for the opportunities He's preparing. Trusting His timing means resting in the assurance that He sees the bigger picture and knows what's best for us. Faith is the key. Faith is the foundation of our relationship with God and the key to unlocking the doors He has for us. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith goes beyond belief. It's trusting God's promises even when we can't see the outcome. It's acting with confidence that He is faithful to His word. In 2 Kings 4, a widow with nothing left to her name obeyed the prophet Elisha's unusual instruction to gather jars and pour her small amount of oil into them. Her faith and obedience led to a miracle. The oil multiplied until every jar was filled. This shows that faith doesn't depend on what we have, but on trusting God to provide what we need. Faith also involves perseverance. The Israelites marched around Jericho's walls for 7 days before they fell. Their faith in God's instructions, despite seeing no immediate results, brought them victory. Similarly, our faith requires action and persistence, trusting that God's promises will come to pass even if the process takes time. The waiting season is preparation. Waiting is one of the most challenging aspects of faith, but it's also one of the most transformative. While we often see waiting as wasted time, God sees it as preparation. Romans 5:3-4 tells us that perseverance builds character, and character produces hope. Waiting seasons are not idle. They are purposeful periods where God works in us to prepare us for what's ahead. Look at the story of Joseph. After being sold into slavery and wrongfully imprisoned, Joseph waited years before stepping into his God-ordained role as a leader in Egypt. During this time, God refined his character, taught him humility, and positioned him to save countless lives. Without the waiting period, Joseph wouldn't have been ready for the responsibility that came with his role. In our own lives, waiting seasons often test our patience and trust in God. However, they also build resilience, deepen our dependence on him, and prepare us for the blessings he has in store. Like a seed that must grow underground before sprouting, we too must undergo unseen growth before stepping into God's plans. By understanding God's authority over doors, trusting his perfect timing, activating our faith, and embracing the waiting season as preparation, we align ourselves with his divine plan. These principles remind us that every step of the journey, whether waiting, trusting, or acting in faith, is part of his greater purpose for our lives. Here's an expanded discussion on 5 key points. God's authority over doors. God's timing is perfect. Faith is the key. The waiting season is preparation. And God makes a way where there's no way. Totaling approximately God's authority over doors, God's sovereignty over doors is a powerful truth that reassures us of his control in every aspect of our lives. Revelation 3:8 declares, "I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." This verse emphasizes that God has the ultimate say in the opportunities we encounter. Whether it's opening a door of opportunity or closing one for our protection, his authority is unmatched. Consider the story of Noah. After Noah obeyed God's instructions to build the ark, it was God who shut the door behind him, ensuring his safety from the flood, Genesis 7:16. This act demonstrates that when God closes a door, it's for our good, even if we don't understand it at the time. Similarly, when he opens a door, no force can stop his plans. In our lives, we may feel frustration when doors don't open as we hope or when they seem to close unexpectedly. However, recognizing God's authority allows us to trust that his decisions are always for our ultimate benefit. Instead of striving in our own strength, we can surrender to his will, confident that his timing and purposes are perfect. God's timing is perfect. God's timing is an essential part of his plan for our lives. Ecclesiastes 3:11 reminds us he has made everything beautiful in its time. This verse highlights the beauty of God's orchestration. Every event and opportunity comes together at just the right moment. Abraham and Sarah experienced the challenge of waiting on God's timing. Although God promised them a son, they had to wait many years for the fulfillment of that promise. When Isaac was finally born, it was clear that his arrival was a divine act, perfectly aligned with God's purpose. Waiting on God's timing can be difficult, especially in a world that values instant results. However, seasons of waiting teach us patience, strengthen our trust, and align our hearts with God's will. During these periods, God works behind the scenes, arranging circumstances and preparing us for what's ahead. Trusting his timing means resting in the knowledge that he knows what's best and will bring his plans to fruition at the right time. Faith is the key. Faith is central to unlocking the doors God has prepared for us. Hebrews 11:6 says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." Faith is not just belief, it's active trust in God's belongings and the willingness to step forward even when the path is unclear. One example of faith in action is the widow in 2 Kings 4. Facing poverty and despair, she obeyed Elisha's instruction to gather jars and pour her small amount of oil into them. Her faith and obedience led to a miracle. The oil multiplied until every jar was filled. This story illustrates that faith doesn't rely on what we have, but on trusting God's ability to provide. Faith also requires persistence. When the Israelites faced the fortified walls of Jericho, they obeyed God's command to march around the city for 7 days. Their persistence and trust in God's plan brought the walls crashing down. Faith is the key that allows us to step into the opportunities God has prepared, even when we can't see the outcome. The waiting season is preparation. Waiting can feel like wasted time, but in God's hands, it's a season of preparation. Romans 5:3-4 tells us that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. Waiting seasons are when God shapes us, strengthens our character, and prepares us for what lies ahead. Joseph's life is a powerful example of this truth. Before becoming a leader in Egypt, he endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. These experiences, though painful, refined his character and prepared him for the responsibility of saving a nation during famine. Without the waiting period, Joseph wouldn't have been equipped for his God-ordained role. In our own lives, waiting seasons teach us patience, humility, and dependence on God. They allow us to grow in ways that might not be possible during times of ease. Embracing these seasons as preparation helps us trust that God is working. Even when we can't see the full picture, God makes a way where there's no way. One of God's most awe-inspiring qualities is his ability to create solutions where none seem possible. Isaiah 43:19 declares, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." This verse reminds us that God specializes in impossibilities. The parting of the Red Sea is a perfect example. When the Israelites were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the sea, God made a way by dividing the waters, allowing them to cross on dry ground. What seemed like an insurmountable obstacle became a path to deliverance through God's power. In our lives, we often face situations where the way forward seems blocked. These moments challenge our faith and trust in God's ability to intervene. However, God's power is not limited by human logic or circumstances. He can create opportunities, provide resources, and open doors in ways we never imagined. Trusting Him to make a way reminds us of His unlimited power and faithful by understanding God's authority over doors, trusting His timing, living by faith, embracing waiting as preparation, and believing in His ability to make a way. We align ourselves with His plan. These principles encourage us to walk in trust and confidence, knowing that God is always at work for our good and His glory. Here's an expanded discussion on 6 key points. God's authority over doors. God's timing is perfect. Faith is the key. The waiting season is preparation. God makes a way where there's no way, and obedience opens doors. Totaling approximately 600 words, God's authority over doors, God's authority over the doors in our lives reminds us that He is in complete control. Revelation 3:8 says, "I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." This verse affirms that no human effort, obstacle, or opposition can alter the plans God has established for us. Consider Noah's story in Genesis. After Noah obeyed God and entered the ark, God Himself shut the door to secure Noah and his family from the flood. This demonstrates that when God closes a door, it's for our protection or redirection. Similarly, when He opens a door, it is an invitation to step into a divinely ordained opportunity. Trusting His authority over doors brings peace, knowing He works for our good and His purposes. God's timing is perfect. God's timing is central to His plans, and He works all things beautifully in their proper time. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Although we often struggle with impatience, God's timing ensures that His purposes are accomplished in the best way. Abraham and Sarah waited many years for the fulfillment of God's promise of a child. When Isaac was born, it was clear that the timing was miraculous, emphasizing God's power and purpose. The delay wasn't a denial, it was preparation for a testimony of God's faithfulness. In our lives, trusting God's timing can be difficult, especially when we face long periods of waiting. However, His timing aligns with His wisdom, and the wait often shapes us to better receive His blessings. Trusting Him allows us to rest in the assurance that His timing is perfect. Faith is the key. Faith essential in stepping into the doors God opens for us. Hebrews 11:6 teaches us that without faith it is impossible to please God. Faith is not merely belief, it's the active trust in God's promises and the confidence to act in obedience. In 2 Kings 4, a widow followed Elisha's instructions to gather jars and pour her small amount of oil into them. Her faith and obedience led to a miracle. The oil multiplied until every jar was filled. This story reveals that faith isn't about our resources, it's about trusting God to provide and perform His will. Faith also requires persistence. The Israelites marched around Jericho's walls for 7 days, trusting God's promise of victory. Their faith paired with obedience brought the walls crashing down. Faith positions us to receive what God has already planned, unlocking the doors He has set before us. The waiting season is preparation. Waiting seasons are often misunderstood as delays, but they are times of preparation. Romans 5:3-4 reminds us that perseverance during trials develops character and hope. God uses waiting periods to refine us and align us with His purposes. Joseph's story exemplifies this truth. Sold into slavery and imprisoned, he waited years before becoming a leader in Egypt. During this time, God shaped his character and positioned him for the role he would play in saving countless lives. Without the waiting season, Joseph wouldn't have been ready for his destiny. In our lives, waiting seasons teach us patience, humility, and reliance on God. They are times of unseen growth, preparing us for the opportunities and responsibilities that lie ahead. God makes a way where there's no way. God's ability to create a way where none seems possible is one of His most awe-inspiring attributes. Isaiah 43:19 declares, "I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." This verse highlights God's power to transform impossible situations into paths of deliverance. The parting of the Red Sea is a vivid example. When the Israelites were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the sea, God parted the waters, allowing them to cross on dry ground. What seemed like a dead end became a path to freedom through His intervention. In our lives, we may face obstacles that seem insurmountable. Trusting that God can make a way reminds us of His power and faithfulness to provide solutions beyond human understanding. Obedience opens doors. Obedience is a vital key to stepping through the doors God opens. When we obey His instructions, we align ourselves with His will and position ourselves to experience His blessings. In the story of Peter's miraculous catch of fish, Luke 5:1-11, Jesus instructed Peter to cast his net into deep waters after a long, fruitless night of fishing. Though it didn't make logical sense, Peter obeyed. His obedience led to an overwhelming catch of fish, demonstrating the blessings that come when we trust and follow God's guidance. Obedience often requires stepping out in faith, even when the path is unclear. It may involve leaving our comfort zones or letting go of our plans. Yet as we surrender to God's leading, we experience His provision and faithfulness by recognizing God's authority over doors, trusting His perfect timing, acting in faith, embracing waiting as preparation, believing in His ability to make a way, and walking in obedience. We align ourselves with His divine plan. These principles encourage us to trust God fully, knowing He is working for our good in every season of life.